I picked up an Easy Rider magazine and I looked at those bikers and I decided, man, I want to be one of those guys. What I saw were guys that had power, that were in control, that didn't care what anybody thought about them. And that's who I wanted to be. And so I joined a motorcycle club, and then I wanted to rise to the top. So I had to be the meanest, nastiest guy in the bunch. Yeah, I mean, there were times when I walked into the bar and I would slap the first guy I saw and take his beer just to show him that I'm here and I will hit you. I told somebody, I can remember if I had $1,000 in my pocket, I wouldn't go get a hotel room. I would spend it all on crack. I was arrested over 30 times in 2006. I was trying to prove how tough I was because I was scared to death. And I can look back and just remember that so vividly. I was that scared little boy watching my dad beat up my mother, that helpless kid that had no friends and nowhere to turn and no parental figures that were healthy in my life. I can look back and see all that. And that's who I was. And I was trying to prove to everybody around me that I wasn't that guy.
Have you ever heard the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? The truth is that change is hard for everyone. Sometimes I put myself through a lot of heartache, a lot of pain before I realize that I need change in my life. Proverbs 16:25 says, there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Do you ever feel like you are on a path to self-destruction? Sometimes I feel like that I have made mistakes so bad that there is no turning back. To make things worse, I tell myself I don't need help. I can change myself. But the truth is that I've been running on a treadmill of lies and I'm chained to doing the same destructive things over and over again. How do I break these chains of false belief, addiction, and hurt in my life? Is change even possible? These are the questions that I want to discuss with our guest today as he tells us his life change story. Today, our guest is zooming in all the way from North Carolina. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself and let the listeners know who you are?
Hey, Eric. Yeah, my name's Jeff Stultz. I'm based out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. I always tell people, man, I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm not a theologian or a seminary graduate. I'm just a guy that God pulled out of a ditch, and I can't shut up about it.
Well, amen, brother. Well, I'm so excited to hear your story. And as all stories go, we have a beginning. So I want to hear about your beginnings. Where did you grow up? And tell me a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I grew up, my father was military, and so I was born in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, but moved to Fort Bragg, North Carolina at an early age. And, I had a pretty good upbringing, but my father was an alcoholic who fought in Korea and Vietnam, and that presented some problems of its own. My father was physically abusive to my mother, and he was mentally abusive to us kids. It was usually as a result of his drinking. And, I grew up with an older brother and two older sisters, and we had a pretty good childhood, but there were some things that, looking back, now I can see created some problems in my life as I grew older. My brother and sisters, they weren't quite like me, and so they, as we grew older, they went on to college and into the business world, and me, I grew up as a heavy kid that was picked on and scared, and I really didn't feel like I fit into any community, and so I was looking for a community to belong to. And, like I said, I was a heavy kid. And when I was 13 years old, I smoked marijuana and drank alcohol for the first time. And then, poof, instant community, right?
So let me ask you this question. Was there any faith? Now, you said your dad was an alcoholic and there was some abuse there. Did you have a decent relationship with your father? And was there any faith in your family? Did you guys go to church or what did you believe about God?
So there, I had a good relationship with my dad. And of course, I was basically his only biological child. And, again, I didn't know that at the time, but we grew up in the Catholic faith, but we didn't, we weren't devout Catholics. It wasn't. We went to church at Christmas and Easter, and that was pretty much it. I went to catechism as a kid, so we didn't really grow up with knowing God, knowing Jesus Christ as our Savior. We didn't really have much of that.
So let me ask you this question about your dynamics in your family. So I talk to a lot of people who have, their adult children of alcoholics, and so was your dad's abuse? Was it pretty consistent? Did you not know what he was going to come home like? I mean, was he physically abusive, or was it more verbal?
So it was. I look back at that, and that's something that's sometimes it can be a little hard to describe because my father wasn't somebody that drank every day. He was just somebody much like me who couldn't stop when he started. And so my father might not get drunk for months at a time. But then when he did get drunk, it seemed that he had PTSD from Vietnam. He would hold himself up in the garage. He would barricade himself with a gun in the garage. I can remember that vividly. I remember him being physically abusive to my mother. He was never physically abusive to any of us kids, but he certainly was physically abusive to my mother at that time in life. Later on he would turn into a wonderful human being. But it was definitely a challenge at a younger age. Through his, like I said, I attribute a lot of that to his time. Seeing some things that you and I probably couldn't imagine, through his time in Vietnam and Korea and those kind of things.
So what would you say would be the most difficult thing as a child? Let's say before you got to high school, what was the most difficult thing that you had to deal with your family, with school? Now you mentioned that you were heavy. I mean, what were the things that you were dealing with as a young child?
I think mostly just feeling alone, feeling like I was alone. I didn't really have anybody that was close to me that I could I think as a child that was overweight and really afraid, I think I didn't want people to know who I was, so it was hard to have real friends because my family life was not emotionally healthy, and so I wasn't emotionally healthy, and I think probably the most difficult thing was when my father was abusive to my mother. I felt helpless and, like I couldn't do anything at all there. And it would grow into, later in life as I, was a young man, my father and I would have physical altercations.
As you got into school, so were you made fun of? I mean, is that what happened to you? When did it come to the point that you realized you're like, hey, I'm overweight and everybody thinks I'm fat? I mean, what was did kids make fun of you? What happened there in school?
Oh, absolutely. I remember being an overweight young man, and I can remember people making fun, rather didn't know if I was a boy or a girl, and just really hurtful things like that, growing up and being around other kids, just that being bullied, being tormented and made fun of.
So did you graduate high school? Did you, and I also wanted to ask you, did you have any girlfriends? Did you date any in high school?
Yeah, so I actually had a beautiful girlfriend in high school. That was a whole nother story how I ended up dating such a beautiful girl, but she was a year behind me in high school, and I graduated, and I should have gone to college. I was smart enough to go to college, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get work. I wanted to go to work right away, and so my big brother lived in the mountains of North Carolina, about 4 hours from where I grew up, and he got me a job at Broyhill Furniture. So I moved up there to go to work, while my girlfriend stayed behind and had another year of high school to finish up. And so I worked for Broyhill up in the mountains of North Carolina for about a year. And so the crazy thing was I really hoped to marry my girlfriend, but we weren't communicating very well. And so I decided that I would join the Army so that I could provide a life for us, and afford to get married. At the same time, she was applying to go to college up in the mountains where I lived so she could be close to me. And so by the time we both realized what we had done, it was too late. I had joined the army and she had been accepted into college. And so we went in completely different directions, which was the end of our probably 4-year relationship. But I can back up just a little and tell you that when I did live up there in the mountains, because I had the girlfriend back home, I would try to come home on the weekends. And so for cheap transportation, I bought a motorcycle. And so I bought it was a Kawasaki KZ 1000. It was like 1981, so it was the fastest production bike that year. And so this guy that grew up with alligator shirts and penny loafers got on this motorcycle. I picked up an Easy Rider magazine and I looked at those bikers and I decided, man, I want to be one of those guys. What I saw were guys that had power, that were in control, that didn't care what anybody thought about them. And that's who I wanted to be. And that really changed kind of the trajectory of my life.
So was that before you went into the military or after or during?
Well, that was prior to entering the military, but it had a major impact on my military career.
So tell me a little bit about going into the military. I mean, did you continue your marijuana and alcohol consumption? Did you?
Absolutely. And the military is an alcohol culture. So, I mean, that's my marijuana was probably my drug of choice at the time, but the military helped to change that quickly to alcohol. I mean, the alcohol is the first thing at every military function. But so I joined the military, and as I said, I was a smart kid. So when I took the test, the ASVAB and all that, I scored very high. Because of my high test scores, I was military intelligence. I was a 98 Charlie, and that was an electronic warfare signal intel analyst. And so I was a code breaker, basically. So I worked on computers, and that was in the early 80s when people didn't have computers at home, but we had computers in the military. And so we would intercept communications from foreign military folks, and we would break the codes. And so that's what I did for a short period, until I was actually at a bar one night and I got shot in the leg in a bar fight. So I was.
You said you got shot in a bar. So what led to that? I mean, did you just get in a fight with a guy or what happened?
Yeah, so it was a guy, it was an all you could drink. Now I remember it was a Thursday night at the Track Lounge, $5 all you can drink draft beer. And so I remember leaving the bar. My big sister was with me, and I left the bar, and there was a guy that was urinating against the building outside in front of my sister. She was offended by it. So I said something to him. So he commenced to beating the crap out of me, man. I mean, this guy, he had me bent over. He had my head in a headlock, and he was started to hit me in the face with. He had this tire iron. I don't even know where the tire iron came from, looking back, but he was hitting me in the face with this tire iron. And I remember my sister grabbed the tire iron and handed it to me. And when she did that, the guy turned loose of me. And he took off running, but then he stopped a little ways out and he started shooting. And so he shot at me 5 times. And when one of my buddies jumped on him, as he was falling to the ground, he hit me in the legs. So got shot in the leg. And I remember they were talking about cutting my leg off from the knee down. And I got to tell you, as a young biker guy, I was thinking, man, please cut my leg off. I was hoping they would. I thought, well, I'll get disability. I'll have this cool wooden peg leg, that I can have. I mean, just thought it would just add to the whole thing, and praise God they didn't cut it off. But I had about 6 months that I didn't have to go to work. I was off work because they found that I wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't my fault that I got shot, ultimately. So I had this convalescent leave for while I was recuperating from the bullet wound. And so I got paid and I didn't have to go to work. And so I just I sat basically in a topless bar all day, every day, called the Bottoms Up. I always remember
And
the
so
place.
you during that time period, you were healing from your leg. That's whenever you were boozing it up. You were just, living it up. And that's when you decided, to go into the biker.
That's when I found these motorcycle club guys, and so I decided that these guys, man, they were those guys I saw in Easy Rider magazine, and and they were living the life that I read about it in Easy Rider magazine. Now I'm meeting these guys. I'm a young guy. I was 19 years old. These guys, man, they were big. They were mean. I thought they were cool. They did whatever they wanted to do. They ran around with the women that were dancing in the topless joints, and so it just was all so appealing to me at the time, and because I was angry and I was mean and I was all those things, I just fit right in, and so I joined a motorcycle club, and I soon realized that the meanest, nastiest guy in the bunch ran the show, and so that's in a motorcycle club. For one, again, I found a community where I felt like I fit in, and then I wanted to rise to the top. So I had to be the meanest, nastiest guy in the bunch. And so as I did that, of course, the military that butted heads with my military career, and especially my security clearance. And so they busted my security clearance, took it away from me, put me to work in a motor pool somewhere. And so I just quit the Army. I ended up going AWOL in 1984. And then I went AWOL from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, turned myself in Fort Ord, California, a year and a half later.
So whenever you go AWOL, do they issue a warrant out for your arrest? What happens? You decide, I'm just not going to show up back at base. I'm just going to go do my own thing. And you start doing that. So tell me about that a little bit. So how long were you AWOL before you got caught?
Yeah. So it's really kind of crazy. And I'll tell you a crazy story. So I was living in the barracks, on Fort Bragg on the base. And one of the guys in my barracks room, you split, there was three of us in a room. So one of the guys he had a gun collection in his wall locker, which was against the rules. He wasn't supposed to have that. And I knew that. So the day after I went AWOL, I went back to my room, because I knew they wouldn't be looking for me that quick. Went back to my room to get some out of the barracks. And that guy was there, and I told him, I said, bro, I really need a gun. I've got some things going on, and I need a gun. And so he loaded a handgun and gave it to me. I turned around and said, now I'm taking the TV, the rest of the guns, and I took I robbed him for everything that he had there in the barracks room. So I'll always remember that.
So he gave you the gun, and then you robbed him.
And I robbed him. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Everything. So I had another buddy of mine that was in the motorcycle club in Fort Bragg with me, and he was in the military, but he was from Los Angeles, and he had a wife and 3 kids. And so he was wore out with the military too. So we decided to go AWOL together, go out to Los Angeles, and the place where he worked before he joined the Army offered to give us both jobs and pay us under his wife's Social Security number so that we didn't get caught. And so we were out. So we traveled cross country from North Carolina to Los Angeles, got out there, got an apartment, got jobs, got plugged into the motorcycle lifestyle out there, worked in LA for about a year, I think, before I turned myself in. Him and I went together and turned ourselves in Fort Ord, California, Northern California.
So why did you turn yourself in?
Well, because I wanted to get, because we were on the run, so at that point we're like, man, I want to quit having to look over my shoulder, and, go ahead and get this thing, because we knew at that point they would just boot us out. And, and as a young man, I thought that would never impact my life. It does. That's never going to, well, it has impacted my life quite a bit. But so we turned ourselves in Fort Ord, California, got it. So I have what they call an other than honorable discharge.
So what happened after that? I mean, now that you're not on the run, I mean, did you stay out in California
Well, I stayed out in California for about 6 months, but again, I got kind of lonely out there because we were, I was part of this motorcycle club back home, and I wasn't part. They didn't have a group in California, and so, at some point, I just decided I wanted to come home, and so maybe 6 months after that.
So now, Jeff, you seem to be a very nice guy right now, and I love watching your Facebook post. You see, you're a guy who loves Jesus. It doesn't sound like you are really a nice guy during this time in your life. Would that be an accurate statement?
I was not, and in fact, one of the greatest parts of my faith is I can tell people that Jesus Christ is absolutely real because I knew me before Jesus. I knew the guy I was, and I was not a nice guy.
Was getting into bar fights a fairly regular thing with you, or?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, there were times when I walked into the bar and I would slap the first guy I saw and take his beer just to show him that I'm here and I will hit you. And that was part of the tough guy persona, the machismo of being in the motorcycle club, and not only being in the club, but I became the president of the club. I was like, one of the youngest guys, and I was the president of the club because I was that guy. I was throwing my weight around and letting people know that.
So what was going on the inside then? That's your outside. You're throwing that stuff around.
I was a scared little boy, man. I was trying to prove how tough I was because I was scared to death. And I can look back and just remember that so vividly. I was that scared little boy watching my dad beat up my mother, that helpless kid that had no friends and nowhere to turn and no parental figures that were healthy in my life. I can look back and see all that. And that's who I was. And I was trying to prove to everybody around me that I wasn't that guy.
Did you
trying to hide it?
Yeah.
I was hiding it really well.
Did you have any guilt or shame there? I mean, I'm sure that again, you were talking about being scared inside. Did you were doing some of these things and being this way to some people. Did you feel bad about any of that stuff, or did you just stuff that down? I mean, what did you do?
I don't think I felt bad about that. I can remember being physically abusive to my wife at the time and putting her in the hospital and and I don't remember feeling bad about any of it.
So let me ask you that. That's a question. Where'd you meet your wife? And are you still married to her, or was that your first wife, or how did that work?
That was my first wife, and that was a couple of wives ago.
Okay.
And so I actually met my first wife at a motorcycle rally, and it was called Coolville, West Virginia, which is kind of a cool name. But so I was in Coolville, West Virginia, at a national rally for the motorcycle club I was with, and she was there with a T-shirt vendor. And it was her boyfriend, and so her and I started talking. I remember it upset her boyfriend, so I ended up beating him up, and she was with me for the rest of the rally. And then she lived in Ohio. I came home to North Carolina. A couple weeks later, she moved here to North Carolina, and we got married probably a couple weeks after that.
How long did you stay married to her?
So we were married 8 or 9 years, but it was a really unhealthy, I was physically abusive. She was unfaithful. I was unfaithful. It was a train wreck, man. And she was a country singer. So we actually left Fayetteville, North Carolina, moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where she, I just thought she was going to hit it big one day, and all that, but she didn't, and we just, after a number of years, we ended up splitting up, and that's when I moved back home to North Carolina.
Isn't it interesting, Jeff, that we seem to sometimes fall into a cycle that we observed while we were children? I mean, you said you saw your dad be abusive to your mom.
Oh, absolutely. We do what our parents do, man. We don't do what our parents tell us to do. We do what our parents do, right? So that's That's absolutely important to be good examples for our children, you know.
So give me the timeline. So you mentioned being in California, and then I assume you went back to North Carolina, and so you got married to this lady 8 or 9 years. That's quite a while. So you split up from her. You got divorced. I mean, where'd you go next? What's going on?
I moved back to, at that point, I moved from Nashville, Tennessee, back to Hickory, North Carolina, which is at the foothills of the mountains, because I had a sister and a brother that both lived there. And so I moved to Hickory, North Carolina. That's where I met my second wife. And she was pregnant when I met her, but the father of the baby was her boyfriend. And him and I were buddies, and we ended up having a big fall. He was a biker guy, and we had a brutal fallout. And I ended up, becoming the boyfriend of her after she had the baby. So by the time her and I got together, the baby was about 6 months old, and we ended up getting married. So that was my second wife.
Did you have any children from your first wife, or no?
No biological children at all. Just the lady that I married, my second wife, her daughter Peyton is my daughter. I ended up adopting her, and we've had a rocky road, because in my addiction and stuff, I walked out on her. But today we have a wonderful relationship, and I have 2 grandchildren. And
so, were you abusive to your second wife, like you were your first wife, or no?
Not abusive to my second wife. I don't know. I was a heavy. I was an alcoholic. I was absolutely an alcoholic, and a lot like I talked about my dad. So I wasn't an alcoholic who had to have alcohol every day. But when I did drink, I couldn't stop drinking. I was a blackout drunk. And so, but I don't know why I wasn't abusive to my second wife. I don't know if it was, so my first wife was 10 years older than me. My second wife was 11 years younger than me. It was a big swing. And I don't know if I was just afraid she wouldn't put up with it, or if her family wouldn't put up with it, or if I just got a little smarter. It wasn't that I was much more caring. I think at that point in my life, it was different. I look back, no one's ever asked me that question. I think back when I was with my first wife, man, I was heavily entrenched in the motorcycle life. Like I said, she was unfaithful. I was violent, and I was unfaithful. I think when I got with my second wife, that some of that went away. We were faithful. We carved out a pretty decent life for a little while. However, I was definitely an alcoholic, and that affected things. I remember getting DUIs and and losing my driver's license. But that's actually when I got. So I went to work. I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. We bought a house. First time I ever bought a house. When we bought a house, I got a job with a company called Florida Tile as a warehouse guy. And then I worked my way up. I went from a warehouse guy to a warehouse manager, to a customer service manager, to a store manager, and then to a regional manager. With them, I ended up being a suit and tie guy with them. In fact, I had to get a tattoo lasered off the back of this hand at that point in my life, because I couldn't cover that up with a long sleeve shirt. And I was still married to her, and so life was pretty good. And of course, I was smoking marijuana. I was doing cocaine on the weekends and drinking, and she was doing the same. We were young, and we were, doing that thing. And
all right, so let me stop you there. So how long were you married to your second wife?
So let's see. So we were married maybe 4 or 5 years.
Okay, so what's your age in that time? Are you in your 30s or 40s, or where are you?
So when we got married, let's see. So I was 30 and she was 19.
Okay. So you were 30, she was 19. So you got married. So in your mid 30s there. So all of this time, you've not mentioned God one time. You've not mentioned Jesus one time. So where
my God was my Harley Davidson. That was what life was all. We said back then, you can kick my dog, you can sleep with my wife, but don't ask to ride my motorcycle. You know, I mean, that was the thing. You know, that was the God.
Yeah, your patch on your back, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So tell me, did you have as looking back, a lot of times we look back and we can kind of see the hand of God through all of that. I mean, did you just totally shun faith whatsoever, or was there anything going on underneath?
No, I just totally shunned faith. I didn't have any reason or any purpose for any of that. You know, I it totally felt like said earlier, I was a confident guy. So, at that point I had become, the president of a motorcycle club. Then I was a nomad, which is even really a bigger honor because, you're trusted to wear this patch. And then, her and I, we become financially pretty successful, at that point. Like I said, I'm a suit and tie guy by day. I'm a tattooed, long haired biker dude over the weekends, and doing my thing. And I ended up gravitating away from the motorcycle club. And so the there was a big falling out. And so they came after my patch. And I wouldn't give my patch up. And and if I can interject, I can back up a little bit. In the original motorcycle club I was with, we went to war with another motorcycle club. They killed one of our guys, and then we were kidnapping, and I mean, it was blowing up club. So the big club that I said was in all those states, they had told us to not be at war with the other clubs. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to stay at war. So I started my own motorcycle club. And so we had walked away from the first club. We're in the second club that I started. And so when I started to gravitate away from the club, they wanted to come and get my patch, and I wouldn't let them. So I felt like I owned that, and I was not going to. So we had, I had a shootout in Wendell, North Carolina with one guy, kind of crazy days. And anyway, I finally ended up away from the group, but knowing that if we ran into each other, it would be bad.
So you're 35, somewhere around there. So what was it that caused the breakup of your second wife? I mean, so you've got your own gang now, correct?
Yeah.
You've got your own gang.
So I'm separated from them. So we're still together. I'm done with them. I'm by myself. I'm riding a motorcycle. I'm still living the life. In fact, in my testimony, I talk about the fact that I left the gang, left the club. They always call it club. I mean, it's a gang. We call it clubs, in the world. But so I left that because I didn't want to die, in some stupid parking lot, and cause my daughter to not have a dad and those kind of things. But I still was living the life. I was still the tough guy. I was still the drugs and alcohol and violence. I was still, all that. So, but I'm also a regional manager with this big tile company. And so I remember I was in the Norfolk, Virginia area to help with the takeover of a store, and I had an affair. And I met a woman, I had an affair. And then I thought she was going to leave her husband. I was going to leave my wife, and we were going to get together. And so, I told my wife, my daughter's mother, that I wanted out. And, and then, of course, the affair, that never worked out the way I thought it would, and so I ended up, in fact, I can remember less than a month later, I regretted it. And I tried to get back with my wife, and it was too late then. She didn't want nothing to do with me.
So you break up from her, and I guess you get divorced or whatever. So you're on your own, and you're not a part of your gang anymore either, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's
so
right.
Where did you go then? I mean, and did you keep your job because you were regional manager?
So I kept my job for quite a while there. I mean, maybe another year and a half after that. I actually transitioned from one big tile company to another as a store manager in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. And at some point, like I said, maybe a year and a half later, I was watching those guys that were out there installing tile, and they were making more money than I was. As a guy in a suit and tie, sitting behind a desk. And so I thought, man, I need to be out there doing that, and so I did. So I started hiring guys and teaching them how to set tile. So probably within a year, of going out into the field, I had 6, 8 guys working for me installing tile.
So you started your own business.
Our own business. That's right, man. That's right. So we were, everything was fantastic. Of course, we were smoking pot and drinking and snorting cocaine and doing that thing. And I remember that when I would catch a guy smoking crack, I would fire because I knew that he'd be stealing my stuff, before long. And so I was living the life, man. I mean, I had some power. I had this company. I had some money. I picked up my daughter every other weekend. I would go have lunch with her at school. I was a pretty good dad. I did love my daughter, and tried. I was just lost, but I would take her to the bars with me at night, and she witnessed things she should have never had to witness, at her age, and but I didn't know what a good dad really looked like, and so I always bragged about how I spent a lot of time with her, but really I rode her around on my Harley when I was drunk. I used her to meet and pick up women, I mean, it was really unhealthy, and so.
So how long did that go on before, I mean, usually things start coming to a head. So what happened?
So that went on for a couple of years. I actually met my next girlfriend, who I was with for a number of years, and we never did get married, but I met her at Love at AOL. You remember Love at AOL? It was like when computers were brand new, and I had my AOL email address, and they had this dating site, and it was free. It was called Love at AOL, and so I met her, and she was a flight attendant, and man, we ended up hooking up, and she bought a house on the beach in North Carolina. I was in Raleigh. We were traveling back and forth. Then I started another tile company at the beach, and so I had guys working in Raleigh. I had guys working at the beach. I had houses in both places, and then in 2001, on 9/10, the day before 9/11, my big sister died.
Oh.
And so she got sick. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She died 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And so that quick. And she was probably my best friend in the world, and so that kind of shifted things. So she died on 9/10, and then that Christmas, my girlfriend was gone to her family in Minnesota. I was going to be by myself. I wasn't with my family. My sister had died. I was dealing with that. I remember I sent one of my buddies to go get us an 8-ball of cocaine, and he came back and said the guy didn't have any powder. He just had crack. He just had the hard, they called it. And so at that point, like I said earlier, I fired guys I caught smoking crack. But you see, I was smarter than they were. I knew. So I assumed I could handle that. And so that Christmas weekend in 2001, man, I tried crack cocaine for the first time. And man, it sent me down a trail that just spiraled completely out of control. Completely out of control. Within a year, I had lost everything. I had warrants for me I lived on Topsail Island, had this beach life. I had left 2 boats sitting in the water to get away from the island because I had so many warrants out for my arrest out there. Because you see, I was this tough guy. So when I ran out of money, I would go hit somebody in the head and get some more money. I didn't have a problem taking an old lady's purse. I didn't have problems doing, I didn't have any kind of remorse. I just did what I had to do, And so I did those things. And so within a year, I had lost everything. And, within another year, I had robbed my parents for so much. They had went into a bankruptcy. I forced my parents into a bankruptcy. And it was horrible, in and out of treatment several times, and then, so I guess it was probably 2 years in, I was at another treatment center, and I had committed to a year and a half in treatment. My parents were they were just done, and so I was trying to, I didn't really want recovery. I just, didn't want to lose my parents and, that. So I went to this treatment. But about 4 months in, my girlfriend, the flight attendant who I'd met those several years earlier, she called me. Her father had died. She inherited some money. And so she she wanted me to leave treatment and come to Minnesota and join her. And so I did. I left treatment way early, never taken recovery seriously. But I did feel like my crack addiction was cured. And it was okay to drink and use any other drugs.
So let me ask you this question. I mean, you told me before you were an alcoholic, but it wasn't one that you had to have it every day and that you just kind of binged every now and then. And when you did, you binged a lot. But then, and it sounds like you did cocaine. But it sounds like crack was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So what was different? And again, I don't know, but I mean, was there a big difference between the crack cocaine and regular cocaine? I mean, was that,
oh my gosh, yeah, highly, highly addictive. And so, I always say crack cured me from alcoholism because so I'm one of those guys, man. I am a quintessential addict. So I don't do anything in moderation. I do everything over the top. Still today, I still do. That's why I've got broken chains with 6,000. That's why, because I do everything too much. I can't stop myself. And so the crack was so addictive, man, that I put everything else aside. I told somebody, I can remember if I had $1,000 in my pocket, I wouldn't go get a hotel room. I would spend it all on crack. I couldn't spend it on anything but crack. Now then with the crack, somebody that had a hotel would let me come and stay with them. But I wasn't even smart. I mean, it would have been cheaper to rent my own hotel and smoke my own crack. But I couldn't do that. I was just so out of control with the crack cocaine. And that's what, my wife moved and took my daughter and it disappeared and, lost contact with her, estranged from my family and my friends and even the bikers don't like the crack addict because you can't trust them.
So you said you went to treatment and you felt like you were cured or that you got over your crack addiction. So,
I was in treatment for about 4 months, and so I thought when I left to go live with my girlfriend in Minnesota, I just, I'd been sober off crack for 4 months. So I thought, well, it's okay to drink and smoke marijuana and snort cocaine. As long as I don't smoke any crack, I'll be okay, And so I went up to Minnesota and I'll never forget, we bought an RV at a pawn shop. So we decided we were just going to travel the country. She had a pocket full of money from her inheritance. And so we jumped in the motorhome and we started driving around, man, and we were smoking pot, drinking, and we thought we were living it up, just having a good old time. And we ended up in Nashville, Tennessee, which I had already been with my first wife, so I knew the lay of the land there. And we decided to buy a bar. And now, I always tell addicts, here's the best advice I can give you. Never leave treatment and buy a bar. So that was a crazy, crazy thing. So we opened a biker bar in Nashville, Tennessee. It was called the Filling Station. And, and again, there I was, man. I thought I was living the dream, man. I mean, you talk about a redneck dream. I had a 55 Chevy pickup truck, had a nice Harley, had a pretty girlfriend, owned a bar. And
so how did you avoid crack? I mean, you're doing this other stuff.
I tell you that, yeah. So once I bought the bar, it probably wasn't 6 months in, and we were pretty successful as a bar. I'm kind of the life of the party guy, and so we had a big draw. A lot of people were coming in the bar, but the first time one of those homeless crack addicts came in with a car mat, I'll never forget. He had a Harley Davidson floor mat for a car, and wanted to know if I wanted to buy it. Well, I mean, I immediately knew. Because it's been my life. I knew he was a crack addict. I mean, whose son comes in with a car mat and wanted to sell it for $5, So I asked him if he could get me a rock, and he did.
Wow.
And then it was on, But now let me back up just a little bit, because before that guy came in with that mat, there was this biker preacher guy named Doc Ray Elder, and he came in the bar. And he was a nice guy, and he didn't try to shove religion down our throats. He didn't try to force us to go to church. He didn't try to make us pray to accept Christ. He was just a nice guy. He was a nice guy, and he wasn't there partying with us. he was just there for us. He was kind and he was caring. And when we had trouble, I can remember him shutting the whole, telling everybody, okay, shut up. So-and-so's dad had a heart attack. We're going to pray. And so we'd pray, and then, we'd let him do his thing, and we'd go back to our stuff. So him and I became good friends. And I wasn't buying any of his Jesus talk, but he was a nice guy, and I liked him. And so we just hit it off when we became friends.
So you said that happened before the guy came in with the car mat, right? That came
That's
in.
right.
So now you've met this guy, you like him, you guys are friends, he's helped you, he's prayed for you, you've kind of had an example of Christ, but you're not buying into the whole Christ thing. But now this guy walks in with a car mat, and you get a rock, you get a crack high, and you said it's on. So did that destroy your business? I mean, how far did you go down the rabbit hole that time?
Oh my gosh, worse than ever. So that destroyed the business. I don't remember exactly how long it was, but before long, the crowd quit coming, Doc quit coming, my girlfriend left. I was still running the bar. I remember we didn't have any power. I was plugging into a lawyer's office next door at night trying to get some power. And so I ended up losing everything and became a homeless addict. So I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was there, and I was homeless for 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. So I walked the streets. I was in and out of jail. I was arrested over 30 times in 2006. Guy helped me write my book, Hope Dealer, a little while back, checked those statistics or did a background check, and it's just absolutely true. So I was, there was always a way. Like I said, I've always been a fairly bright guy, so I could figure out ways to come up with money. And my father was very codependent. And I could talk him into sending me money all the time, and which almost caused him and my mother to divorce, and so it was just, it was just absolutely insanity that I had gone down that low, man. I was walking around the streets in Nashville, Tennessee.
So was that your bottom? Because that's where, we always talk about in recovery, the turning point, where we reach that very bottom where we realize, like the prodigal, that we're in the pigsty, and we say, gosh, this is the worst. I need to do something. I mean, was that the low for you, or did it get worse?
Well, that was not the low. It took some time. I always tell people, as a recovery pastor, I hear from families more than I hear from addicts. I hear from families wanting answers and wanting to know what to do. And I never have a good answer for them, because what I have to tell them to do is you have to let your loved ones suffer the consequences of their actions. Because consequences seem to be about the only thing that precipitate change. That's it. So after 3 years, so I tell people, you're worried about letting your son be homeless for a week or hungry. It didn't take me a week or 3 weeks. It took me almost 3 years. And so, like I said, in 2006, I was arrested over 30 times. My father bonded me out constantly. So there was always, a way to get out. So in March 1st of 2007, I got arrested for the last time. It was for a probation violation. And because of the nature of that charge, my dad couldn't bond me out. So I sat in jail for about a month. And I remember when I got out, I didn't want to quit getting high, but I wanted to quit going to jail. I knew that I was soon going to be in prison for the rest of my life, because I was doing whatever I needed to do, And so I was smart enough to know the only way to quit going to jail was to quit getting high. And so I tried to think of anybody that I knew in Nashville that didn't get high, and the only person I could think of was that biker preacher guy, Doc Ray. And so I called him, and he was really happy to hear from me, and he invited me to church. And, I remember I thought, and I say in my testimony, I thought church was just a weekly inconvenience where a bunch of holy people got together, but I didn't know where else to go where I could find people that weren't getting high. And so I showed up for church that first Sunday. That was April the 15th, 2007. And I was waiting for the judgment. I always say it was an older folks church, and I can say that because now I'm one of the older folks. But so I was probably the youngest person there, and I walked in. I had long hair, all my teeth are false, so I didn't have any teeth. I had tattoos, and I walked in. I was just waiting for the judgment, and because I really didn't want to be there. I was looking for an excuse to leave, but it never came, man. And those people at that church, Oak Hill Assembly of God on Franklin Pike in Nashville, Tennessee, they loved on me in a way that I'd never been loved on my whole life. They treated me like I was valuable. They encouraged me. Man, they were just so kind to me that I had to come back. And so the next Sunday, April 22nd, 2007, I was in the third pew there at the church, and it was just as if Jesus Christ sat down beside me and told me it was time. I didn't go forward for an altar call. I didn't put my hand in the air. I just sat right in the pew and asked Jesus Christ to be the Lord of my life. And at that moment, here's something that, I don't mean to upset Christians. Well, maybe I do. I'd like to upset Christians. But anyway, when I accepted Jesus Christ, something changed. But everything didn't change, man. I still had a foul mouth. I was still a liar. I still had a lot of character defects to deal with. So when I accepted Christ, something absolutely changed, man. And I know my eternity was secure. I know I got the free gift. I accepted it, and I was given a new standard to live by. But it was when I plugged into Christ in recovery that everything began to change.
So what led you to that? Did the church have a recovery program, or did you get into a recovery program on your own? Tell me about the events.
They didn't. So within 3 weeks of my salvation experience, we had a church dinner, and I sat by a couple I'd never met, Jim and Deb. I'll never forget them. And so they invited me to a church they went to on Friday nights for a ministry called Celebrate Recovery. And so here's the thing. So I remember telling them how Jesus had delivered me from my addiction. I didn't need a recovery program, So yeah, all right. And it was an amazing experience when I got there, and I went in and I got into a share group, and I realized that it was okay to be me and to share my struggles. That other people struggled with the same struggles that I did, and so I'll never forget there was a guy, he was a greeter, Tommy Duncan. He's still there. 17 years later, he's still there. And he encouraged me so much that I would be biting at the chops to get to Celebrate Recovery on Friday night to see Tommy Duncan, to tell him what God had done in my life that week. So it was just really amazing. And it was about an hour drive for me to get there. So, but it was there, and let me tell you, and I committed, because like I said, I don't do anything halfway. And so I plugged into Celebrate Recovery. I quickly got into a step study, began to work through the 12 steps, got a sponsor. And I can remember my dad would come to Nashville to visit me. It was about a 600-mile drive from Fayetteville, North Carolina to Nashville. And my dad would come to visit me for the weekend. And I would tell him on Friday, I'd say, I'm sorry, Dad, you can come with me, but I can't miss. It's just too important, and so he was good with that, and so that laid a foundation in me that was just amazing, man. And I grew in my faith. I plugged in with my church. In fact, it was just so amazing. There were a group of older ladies, widows, in the church, and there maybe 7 or 8 of them. And so on Sundays, they would take me out to lunch after church. So I was the only guy in these 7 or 8 women that were 20, 25 years older than me. And I would make them laugh, and they would love on me. And it was just beautiful. It was just beautiful. God knew exactly what I needed in my life. The preaching was not real, was not fantastic. It was the love that I needed from those women, and then the healing that I found in Jesus Christ through Celebrate Recovery.
So we have a saying at Celebrate Recovery. We say it works if you work it, and it won't if you don't. What did it look like to work it for you? I mean, you said you joined a step study and stuff. I mean, what changed during that time period that was different than before?
Well, because I was because I wanted recovery. Like I said, my desire was just to stay out of jail. Then my desire was to just not get high. But then my desire was recovery. I mean, sobriety and recovery are not the same thing. So we say you can find sobriety without Jesus, but you can't find recovery without Jesus, because recovery is about getting something back. I mean, just that's, like I say, that's when everything began to change, man. That's when I realized who I was in Christ. I didn't have to find my identity for what other people thought about me. I didn't find my identity, in women. I didn't find my identity in drugs or motorcycles or patches, or even from my parents. I found my identity in Jesus Christ, and I was all in. And see, that's the thing about the beautiful thing about being in recovery, around recovery people, or even around addicts, man. Somebody that's been in a ditch that I've been in, man. When you come out, you come running out, man. And so I ain't looking back, man. I came running out of that ditch, and I'm all into recovery now. So I grabbed a hold of that next thing, this addictive personality that I have, and I'm using it for the glory of God.
Amen, brother. So, he is in our weakness. He is strong, and
right.
Yeah, look what he's doing through you. So, what year was that you did your first step study and got all that? What year was that?
That was 2007.
All right, 7. Okay.
So in 2007, I plugged into sober recovery, went through a step study. Christmas time of 2007, my mother decided she wanted to see me for the first time in 4 years. And so I flew back home to North Carolina for a short visit for Christmas, and she was convinced that there was a change. And so she asked me if I'd move back home to North Carolina. And it took about 3 months. I was on probation. I had to get my probation changed from Tennessee to North Carolina. So it took about 3 months to get everything switched over. And so by March of 2008, I had moved back to North Carolina. So I got here, I plugged into a church, God opened a door. I started doing church and dinner in Crack Hotel parking lots here in Fayetteville. And the church, I mean, it wasn't church sponsored. It was just something, God opened a door, and I started doing it, doing Bible studies on the weekends with the people that lived there. And so I soon met with the pastor of the church and told him about what I was doing, and so we talked and decided to start a sober recovery ministry there at the church here in my hometown. And that subsequently also is where I met my current wife, at Celebrate Recovery there. So she came, famously to help. She was one of the church people that came to help, and they realized she was just as screwed up as the rest of us. So, and then in 2016, my mother passed away. Mm. And when my mother passed away, she left me a little bit of money, not a whole lot of money, but a little bit of money. And I thought, well, I can either just, go through this money, or I could do something I've never done and always wanted to do, is buy a brand new Harley Davidson. So my whole life, I've been a biker my whole adult life, never had a brand new motorcycle. And so I went out and bought a brand new motorcycle, and never forget, I didn't tell my wife. I just kind of rode it up to her work and said, look. She said, oh, you'll never ride it, So 150,000 miles later, here we are. So anyway, and so later on, I went to the summit that year in 2016, and I talked. There were another couple of bikers there, and we talked about starting a Celebrate Recovery motorcycle group. And so I prayed about it. Woke up the next morning with the name Broken Chains, and we started, Christian recovery motorcycle group, and so we were all about Celebrate Recovery. You had to be a part of Celebrate Recovery to join the motorcycle group, and so that first year, 2017, I rode the motorcycle over 50,000 miles that year, and and spread the word to people about Broken Chains, and so we grew to about 400 members that first year.
Wow, that's a lot. So is change possible?
Change is possible, man. I know it is. It happened to me. That's That's the motto of Broken Chains. So, we've grown to about 6,000 members today. It's about 7 years later. We're in 13 countries. We're in all 50 states. We've had to get permission from those heavy hitter motorcycle clubs to fly our patch. And we've done that. God has opened the doors for us. And we say we're a fellowship of bikers and motorcycle enthusiasts who have found hope and healing in Jesus Christ through the Christ-centered recovery process, helping others to realize that change is possible. Because people out there don't even know that change is possible,
So if someone's interested in what you're dealing, which is hope. So if someone's interested in that, do you have a website? Do you have any contact information you'd like to give out to the listeners?
Sure. You can go to motorcyclemissionary.com. You can go to brokenchains.com. My email is jeff@motorcyclemissionary.com.
Well, brother, you're an inspiration. I love the things that you're saying. And what is the message of Jeff's life? What is the message that you want to convey to the listeners?
17 and a half years ago, Eric, I was eating out of dumpsters. Man. I didn't have anything except the clothes I was wearing. And today, man, a little over 17 years later, I've got a wonderful wife. I've got a beautiful family. I own several homes that are paid for. We're debt free. Praise God. And I don't say any of that to brag on me, because the culmination of all my good choices, of all my best decisions, had me eating out of dumpsters. It was when I gave my life to Christ and then learned how to live life through the Christ-centered recovery process, which helped me to release the shame and the guilt of the wreckage that I had made so I could walk forward and recover the purpose that God created me for. Everything changed, man. Everything changed. Hallelujah.
Jeff, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you finally realize that the path that you've been traveling down is the wrong path, maybe you've come to the same conclusion that I did 14 years ago and that Jeff did 17 years ago, that you need to go in a different direction. Pain is inevitable, but misery is optional. Change is possible as you surrender to Jesus Christ. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time. Hey, if you are still listening and you liked this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you and may God bring positive change to your life.